Welcome to the conversation. I'm Paul Grondahl, the director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University of Albany. I'm really excited about our guest today. He's a friend, a colleague. He was my boss for a time, Casey Seiler, the editor of the Times-Union. Welcome, Casey.
Hey, Paul, good to see you.
Yeah, so you took over at the end of January, succeeded Rex Smith, and then the world changed. First, the coronavirus pandemic, and now these sweeping mass protests for against systemic racism and police brutality. How are you juggling all that?
I've got this big empty attic, how can I, with that kind of room, it has been something. You are correct. The timing of my ascension to become the editor of the Times-Union was somewhat problematic. Rex Smith kind of let me know that he was going to be stepping back, our former editor, who has been in that office for 17 years, I guess. And of course, there were a couple of weeks in between, and then it was sort of announced to the newsroom, I guess, in the second week of January. And then I finally moved into Rex's office probably in the middle of February, and he took a new office over by Jay Jochnowitz, and I was in it for about 2 weeks, and then I went on vacation, like a long planned vacation with my wife and my brother and my sister-in-law down to St. Lucia, and that was the week that the world shut down. And so we were down there, we had a very nice time, and we all got probably the last vacation. It was really the last week that you could take a vacation that involved getting on a plane without, with impunity. And then we got back, and of course there were a lot of phone calls that week, and because everybody was kind of migrating out of the office and starting to work from home, which was a miracle, and really came off very, very well, largely because of our outstanding IT staff it was able to kind of set people up, including like layout, which is incredible. We've never done that before, like laid out the paper sort of remotely from people who are, at their homes all over the capital region. Right. And so I sent an email to everybody as I was about to go to the airport in St. Lucia to fly home. And I said, God, you've done such great work. I can't wait to see those of you who are still in the newsroom when I get back. And I got a quick email back from Ruth Fantasia, our HR director, saying, yeah, no, you can't come back to the office. You're on quarantine. You're on lockdown for 2 weeks, buddy. So find a place to work. And
amazing.
And I've only been back to the newsroom once in the 3 months and change since then. I guess almost exactly 3 months since we got back from vacation. And it's really been amazing. I guess about a week after we got back, I had to call Rex about something else. And I sort of stopped myself and I said, listen, before we talk about what I want to call you about, you couldn't have waited another 6 months. Right. Step back. You had to do it. You had to do it in February, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah. But of course, the flip side of that is that there is no way that we could have continued to operate really well and do meaningful, important work on, covering the pandemic and everything else that we've been working on without the team that Rex, over the course of all the years that he was editor, put in place.
Right.
And so I'm mad at him, but at the same time, I'm very grateful for the work of building up the organization and protecting the organization from kind of the worst of the whittling down that so many news organizations have experienced. That's a testament, of course, not only to Rex, but to the publisher, George Hearst, and to the Hearst Corporation, which I can say with great assurance in this crisis has behaved really honorably, especially in comparison to a lot of other companies that have put people on a furlough,
right,
that have moved to layoffs, that kind of thing. So I feel very grateful to have spent almost half of my career now at the Times-Union.
I also was impressed during the protest Saturday that turned violent in Albany with tear gas and things. You were out on the street, and I worked at the Times-Union full-time as a reporter from 1984 to 2017, and I guess 4 or 5 editors. First time I'd seen that. Why did you want to be out there in the thick of things?
Well, and this was the action that took place at South Station,
Right.
kind of 10 days ago.
Right.
And this was, there had been the Saturday rally right by the statue of Henry Johnson, right where, Washington.
Townsend Park, right? And then they marched
Townsend
down.
Park,
Yeah.
exactly. And it very peaceful, hundreds of people there, very passionate, very emotional, but completely peaceful. And then we began to get word about 6:30, 7 o'clock that there was a scene developing at South Station where people were, some, not all, by any stretch of the imagination, activists who were down there were peppering the cops' cars with stones, with bricks. And, I live in the Pine Hills, so I was really only maybe a 7-minute drive from there. So Paul Nelson headed down there. I went down there, and when I got there, I was walking around trying to kind of get my feet under me. And who do I see about 7 feet to the left of me, but somebody else who wasn't supposed to be working on Saturday night? It was Will Waldron, our photo editor.
Right.
Will and I were, of course, both masked up. And I was, wearing a hoodie and shorts. I had literally just gotten up from dinner and walked out the door. And I was like, Will. And we both kind of pulled down our masks. And he said, I thought for sure you were a supervisor, that you were a cop, because with a mask on, it's kind of hard to tell. And so I was probably only down there for about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, but I was down there when the scene did get fairly ugly as the cops sort of formed two lines and sort of pressed the more riled up activists who were throwing things down towards Pearl Street. And that's when somebody threw kind of a bag Molotov, if you will. And it got fairly hairy. I got a little bit of tear gas, but just enough to make me know I never want to be directly tear gassed in my life. And but Paul Nelson was really on the sort of more dangerous side of the line, as it were, and did really, really good work. And Mike Goodwin, who was back home in Schenectady, jumped in and kind of acted as the color man, as it were, taking reports from the scene and looking at social media and kind of lashing together the first version of the story. And that was the night that ended with Kathy Sheehan, Albany mayor, declaring a curfew. And it's been a remarkable week since then. Also a week that has included a lot of discussion within the newsroom about kind of our role, what we need to be careful of, what we as a news gathering organization need to do better. And it's been pretty remarkable, I'd say.
That's what, how do you strike the balance of being objective and covering, the good, the bad, and otherwise of these protests, but also not overly focusing on, unsubstantiated social media rumors about Antifa and other groups? I mean, there's a lot to sort through, and you don't want to be a cheerleader for the movement, even if, staff believe it in their heart. But how do you strike a balance between, objectivity, aggressive news gathering, and sort of being, you're a resident of Albany too,
It in many ways, I think covering President Trump and the Trump administration after the last couple of years has been sort of a good preparation for this, although it's not a one-to-one comparison. But objectivity isn't about giving equal credence to a position that is bogus or ugly or racist or destructive. So in other words, there is no sort of pro-cop violence side of the argument that we need to include in our coverage of these rallies. Of course, we're going to tell the story, and we are going to make a clear distinction between a rally, a protest, and looting on the other side, which certainly there have been episodes of destruction, of looting that have kind of come in the wake of a couple, but not nearly the majority of the rallies and the protests that we've seen so far. You, of course, you need to report on that as well, but you don't want that to swamp our coverage of what's a movement that's been a long time in coming, that has brought together Black people, white people, you name it. Yesterday, we're talking on Tuesday. On Monday, there were rallies in Clifton Park and Del Mar, which are, that's the burbs. Those are the biggest, some of the biggest burbs we have in the capital region, and they got incredible turnouts in both places. Just the day before that, we had a very large rally in Saratoga Springs that came just before a truly enormous rally in Troy that was peaceful all the way through. A remarkable, well-organized, well-oiled a protest that really went off virtually without a hitch. Tensions got a little bit heated in the evening, but everybody kind of dispersed, and we didn't hear about any kind of incidents. The only incidents we heard of were the cops arresting your classic kind of figures in camouflage who showed up to I guess the thinking is that they showed up with an idea to disrupt the rally. And I think if memory serves, one gentleman was arrested who was armed.
Right.
So happily, nothing went wrong there. Nobody hurt. And hopefully that will serve as, the template for all the rallies that come after this. We're talking on a day when the New York State Senate is going to continue to pass a slate of bills along with the Assembly aimed at criminal justice reform, and many of them, or one of them, involves repealing 50A, which is a state law, part of state civil rights law, that prevented the release of police disciplinary records. I know that you have bumped up against that in your reporting down through the years as well. I was just talking to Brendan Lyons, our Capitol and Investigative Chief, yesterday. He's, of course, written about it endlessly. That's a remarkable thing that, 2 weeks ago, no one could have predicted was going to happen. So
it seems like the both this movement and also the coronavirus pandemic accelerated the change of the world order in a matter of months with the virus, and now in a matter of weeks with these demonstrations and protests. But let me ask about diversity. I'm still part of the Times Union. I've worked there for full-time for 33 years, and I still write a weekly column, almost 40 years invested there. And it's not for lack of trying, both for the Hearst Corporation, the editors succeeded you. We've not had a lot of diversity on the staff. You mentioned Paul Nelson, a good friend and colleague, African-American reporter. There may be a couple other reporters of color, but it's been a challenge. I don't know if it's the market. Why do you think that is at the Times Union, that you haven't been able to either attract or retain more reporters of color on the staff?
Yeah, it has been difficult, and as you say, it's not for lack of trying. I know that Rex made a point and worked very hard to kind of reach out and try to recruit, young journalists of color. That work will go on and hopefully will increase in the wake of this. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Our newsroom is not nearly as diverse as the community that we cover, and that puts us at a disadvantage without a doubt, which is not to say that a white journalist can't cover a community of color, or that a journalist of color can't cover a predominantly white city or suburb or anything like that. But without a doubt, if your newsroom looks like your community, it is going to be a lot easier to build trust, to make inroads, just simply to establish the type of good sourcing that is kind of the bedrock of what every journalist does, right? And we recognize that, and we recognize that we have work to do on that front. As you noted, the Hearst Corporation works very hard on these issues as well. We have the Hearst Fellowship Program, which rotates in 3 young journalists to our newsroom for a 1-year stint and then they go off to usually some of the larger Hearst properties, such as Houston or San Francisco. That has been a conduit to bring, diverse young journalists into our newsroom. But of course, then they go off to the big city, or the bigger city, as it were, and frequently they do get snapped up. I'm happy to say that one fellow who cycled through the program just about 2 years ago, who is Masara Makati, came back happily to the region, and we were able to hire her up at the beginning of the year. She's terrific. She has done great work covering the protests, and also being kind of an advocate for change within the newsroom on many of these issues. And it's great to have her. Although this, of course, it's everybody's work, right?
Right. Also, I want to talk about, you've played many roles at the Times Union in almost 20 years now there.
20 years and change. 20 years. It's 20 years in January. Yeah.
Amazing. But you were entertainment editor. You did, preview and the arts coverage. You were the Capitol bureau chief doing state politics. You have your Sunday column, which I've always enjoyed. I can tell you this. I tell you it often. You're a tremendous writer. But I'm interested in...
That's praise from Caesar.
That always skews really kind of ironic humor, kind of very funny. But in the last few columns, you've been stepping back and writing. You wrote about a woman who was having a hard time getting some assistance with a single mother. Is it hard to be humorous in this time in that column?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you mentioned the column. That's a column I wrote, I guess it's 2.5 weeks ago now, about a woman who, Janie Smith is her name, lives in West Hill, and she had been hung up basically in technological bureaucratic purgatory waiting for her unemployment benefits to come through. And it had been more than 2 months, and she was getting desperate, and she was down to, her last $60 or so. And I had something kind of funny all teed up, but she reached out in a Facebook message, and I kind of read it. The truth of the story is I read it to my wife because I initially thought it was from a friend of ours who had the same name. And so I read her the note, and my wife said, "You got to give that woman a call." And, always take journalistic advice from your spouse, because I called up and she was incredibly eloquent, forensic in her description of what she's gone through and her kids had gone through. Her youngest child had been born premature and had gone through 2 heart transplants. As a parent, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And of course was gravely worried about her son being immunosuppressed and what happens if coronavirus comes into the house. And so I really just kind of gave the column over to letting her kind of tell her story. And it was remarkable. The column went up Saturday evening online, and then was in the paper on Sunday. And within by the time I was eating breakfast on Sunday morning, people were reaching out to say, how can I help this woman? John McDonald, our local state assemblyman, whose office had been trying to do similar work for other folks, said, give me her contact information. We can cut out the middleman at DOL and make sure that she gets some assistance right away. So the help that was offered by private individuals, by elected officials, and it was remarkable. I mean, for the next couple of days, I kept getting emails from people saying, what can I do to help? I want to send her a Price Chopper gift card. Or one woman who I wrote about in sort of the follow-up column the next week, I wrote her a check for $500. I mean, that's right. It's remarkable. And it was a reminder that amid all this suffering and angst and anxiety that everybody's going through, that people want to help, that there are people, the default setting of most people in our community is, what can I do to make this situation better? And
Exactly. I mean, it also reminds you why you do this work, why I still love doing it. I mean, people, you can really move people by your words and help others in an indirect way. You've had all these different jobs and you still write the column. You were hosting, the Reporters Roundtable at New York Now, the collaboration with WMHT TV and the Times Union. And now you've got a job where you're overseeing a staff, remotely, and whenever you'll get back to the office, a lot of administrative. How are you juggling it all? And do you think you'll have to drop something? I'm sure you love all the things, but you can't do it. You do have a lot of skills, Casey, but you can't do it all, possibly. I mean, do you ever run out of steam when you have to write that column and you just, by the end of the week?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I used to love Fridays.
Right.
When I was a kid, every kid loves Friday because like the weekend is almost there, and everybody kind of lays back at school. But when you write a Sunday column and you got to file it by 5:30 or 6 on a Friday, and if you don't know what you're gonna write, you know what it is. You know the anxiety of staring at the blank page. What I've found is if I can get like 300 of the 800 words written before 9 a.m. on Friday, I'm okay. But if the workday begins kind of in earnest and I don't have at least kind of a good start, I'm in big trouble. And that's when I'm really just kind of choking it out and kind of limping to the finish line. But that's a wonderful feeling to have 300 or 400 words written. And then it's just like, oh, I'm almost there. I'm almost done. But there's a peck to death by ducks aspect of the job of being an editor. But happily, the jobs I've had kind of leading up to it have kind of prepared me for it. As you noted, I was entertainment editor, and then I was Capitol bureau chief starting in 2008, which is a very weird shift to go from covering entertainment to covering New York State government.
Not really. I've been around the legislature long enough. There's a lot of humor there.
Yeah, the joke was that when I went down in 2008, it was a reflection of just how entertaining New York State government was. It was just a couple of months after Eliot Spitzer had resigned, and but yeah, when you're doing that, and then when I came back to the newsroom, and I guess it was 2017 as a senior editor and then managing editor, the diversity of stuff that you were carrying on your tray, as it were, increases, and you just try not to let anything fall off, and it happens occasionally. But what Rex Smith always said about the job is that it never ends. There is no minute in the day when you are not being the editor of a metropolitan newspaper.
Right.
But that's fun,
Plus, I mean, I don't really want to, this is a whole different discussion, but the economics and business model are just very difficult, and certainly during the shutdown haven't gotten any easier. But I mean, you were a ski bum, right, in Wyoming. You've been up in Vermont. You've done different things. Is this kind of your dream job? I mean, you moved up because you have the skills, but do you like this job more than any other jobs you've had? And you think this is what you were sort of moving towards, or did it just happen that you kept getting promoted and stuff?
It literally just happened that I kept getting promoted. Right. Like I have never taken a job thinking this job is a good job, but what I really want to do is the next thing up the ladder at all. And in fact, every time that I have been promoted at the Times Union, you know how it is with people, generally people who are functional or who are good at their jobs. The first time they get a new job or get a promotion, the first day is the day that they think, well, today is the day that I'm going to be found out that I'm a screw up,
Imposter syndrome.
That I've been fooling people for, that I've hustled them and I'm about to be caught out.
I've always felt that. Yeah.
And so as the more significant and that's what people who are good at their jobs, that's what they think, But I'm sure there are people out there who are completely narcissistic who think, well, yeah, of course I deserve this promotion. I'm going to be great at it. It's going to be terrific. But those are usually people who fall on their face, right? But I've thought that at every job I've gotten, from the Burlington Free Press when I started there as like the assistant features editor to when I became the entertainment editor at the Times-Union. And oh boy, when Mary Fran Gleason, the former managing editor, told me, hey, Rex and I think you would make a really good Capitol bureau chief, I swear, Paul, my response was, am I doing something wrong?
Right.
Or, because I thought they're giving me a job that I'm clearly not ready for, not suited for, just so I fall on my face, and then they can just fire me and say, well, Casey, what are you going to do? It was a screw up. And Mary Fran literally had to kind of talk me off that ledge and say, no, we're the Albany Times-Union. Covering the Capitol is sort of important to us. We would not give you a job just for the purpose of watching you screw up at it. That's not a good business model. It's not a good management plan, which of course makes perfect sense in retrospect. But when you're sitting in the room, I just thought, well, why are they doing this to me? This is crazy. And yeah.
And the other thing is, I forget if you were a journalism major. I never took a journalism class. I was a lit major, and this will have to be for part two because I have to get into the next Zoom meeting with the Writers Institute with my staff. But the literature, I mean, you're a deep reader and very well read. I'm trying to remember, were you a lit major in college or were you a journalism major?
I went to Northwestern, which of course has a fantastic journalism school, Medill, attached to it. But no, I was in the College of Arts and Sciences. I was an English major, specifically in the writing program, which was actually writing fiction. And it was sort of a specialized major within the English major. But I was a writer and then an editor for the Daily Northwestern. I was the only editor who was not a Medill student. So no, never took a lesson, as they say.
I didn't either, but I learned on the job. I started on Night Cops and I observed some very, very good journalists and I still do. I'm very proud of the work you and your team are doing during this unprecedented time, and keep up the good work. Part two will have to be about books and literature and we love collaborating with the Times-Union, the Writers Institute. We do things at Times-Union Media Center and the Hearst Media Center rather, and we'll keep it going. Thanks for all your good work as editor.
Well, you know that I have always said that in so many things, the Capital Region gets what it deserves, but in the Writers Institute, it gets so much wildly more than it deserves. It's remarkable. It's a resource that I couldn't be more pleased to see somebody of your caliber running. So
thanks a lot. Right back at you. This is Casey Seiler, editor and vice president of the Times-Union, from his attic in the Pine Hills. Thanks, Casey.